What if a single walk down a Savannah street could shatter a general's world and spark a revolution for justice? In this gripping tale, Serena Jackson, a high-ranking black general, faces the sting of prejudice when two officers see her skin before her honor, cuffing her in a moment that strips her of dignity but ignites her unyielding spirit. From humiliation to a triumphant stand, her journey unveils the raw power of resilience, the fight for equality, and a legacy that challenges us all to see beyond the surface a story so moving, you'll feel every heartbeat of her battle. Don't miss a second of this emotional roller coaster. Hit that like button to fuel the fire, and subscribe with the bell on to catch every inspiring tale we bring your way. What if the woman you overlooked on the street held the power to reshape a nation? On a crisp morning in Savannah, Georgia, Serena Jackson, 42, walked with quiet confidence along the cracked sidewalk of a familiar neighborhood, her presence as unassuming as the soft hum of the waking city, a gentle rhythm of life stirring awake. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie, a worn baseball cap pulled low over her deep brown eyes, and a light backpack slung over one shoulder, she blended seamlessly into the morning bustle coffee shops, opening their doors with the faint jingle of bells, neighbors rushing past with hurried steps, the distant wail of sirens fading into the haze. To any onlooker, Serena was just another woman savoring a rare day off, her head bowed slightly, her steps steady and deliberate, as if tracing a path she'd walked 1,000 times before. But beneath her understated exterior burned a fire. Few could imagine a secret that would soon turn this ordinary day into an extraordinary reckoning. Serena was no ordinary woman. She was a high-ranking general in U.S. national security, a figure whose life had been forged in the crucible of discipline, sacrifice, and an unyielding commitment to justice. Born in the very streets she now walked, Serena had risen through ranks that few could dream of, her journey marked by the weight of her mother's words echoing in her memory, "Prove you're more, with study, not shouts." Today, she sought solace in the simplicity of her roots, a quiet escape from the high-stakes world of command centers and classified briefings. The air carried the scent of blooming jasmine, mingling with the earthy aroma of freshly brewed coffee from a nearby cafe, and for a moment, Serena allowed herself to breathe deeply, her shoulders relaxing under the weight of her backpack. She passed an elderly man selling peaches at a corner stand, his weathered hands arranging the fruit with care, and she smiled softly, a flicker of nostalgia warming her heart. This was her Savannah, gritty, warm, and unchanging, a place where every crack in the pavement held a memory of her childhood dreams. But as she turned the corner, a faint unease stirred in her chest, the kind that comes from years of navigating a world that too often judged her by her skin before her soul, a world where peace could vanish in an instant. That flicker of unease in Serena's chest wasn't just intuition, it was a warning. One that crystallized the moment two police cars rolled into view, their engines humming with a purpose that sent a chill down her spine. The vehicles slowed to a crawl beside her, their tires crunching against the gravel-strewn pavement, a sound that cut through the morning's calm like a blade. Without warning, two officers stepped out, their boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud, and the older one, a man with a stern jaw and eyes narrowed in suspicion, barked a command that shattered the stillness. "Hands up, against the wall now." Serena froze, her heart pounding as her mind raced to make sense of the moment she was alone, her hands empty, her only crime the backpack resting lightly on her shoulder. Confusion flickered in her dark eyes, but there was no room for questions, no space for reason in the charged air that now crackled between them. The younger officer, his face flushed with a mix of arrogance and unease, stood back, his hand hovering near his radio, watching her every move with a smirk that spoke volumes. Share was a woman who, to him, didn't belong in this quiet Savannah street, a woman whose very presence seemed to demand scrutiny. Serena raised her hand slowly, her movements deliberate, her voice steady despite the tremor of injustice rising within her. "Can I ask what this is about, officer?" But the older officer's response was cold, cutting through her words like a gust of winter wind. "We got to call someone suspicious with a back exposed under the gaze of passers-by who slowed their steps, their whispers growing louder, a chorus of curiosity and fear that only deepened the sting of this unwarranted intrusion." Not a soul could have foreseen the storm brewing beneath Serena's calm exterior. As the officers' scrutiny deepened, their voices laced with a mocking edge that sliced through the Savannah morning. The older officer stepped closer, his breath visible in the cool air, his hand tightening around her ID as if it held some hidden secret, while the younger one circled her with a grin that twisted the knot of unease in her stomach into something sharper disdain. "What's in the backpack?" The older one demanded, his tone dripping with suspicion as he snatched it from her shoulder, the fabric brushing against her skin with a roughness that felt like an insult. Serena's heart thudded, but she kept her voice steady, replying, "Just bread, a water bottle, a notebook, nothing more than a trip to the store warrants." The younger officer chuckled, a sound that grated against her nerves, and began rifling through the contents with exaggerated carelessness, pulling out each item as if expecting to uncover a weapon instead of a loaf of bread still warm from the bakery. "Going to the store, huh? Looks like you're hiding something too calm for my liking," he sneered, his eyes narrowing as they roamed over her, lingering on the color of her skin as though it were evidence of guilt. The older officer joined in, his voice rising with a mocking lilt. "Institutional security. She says maybe she's guarding a secret stash." Their laughter echoed off the nearby brick walls, a cruel symphony that drew the attention of a small crowd shopkeepers, pausing with raised brows, a mother pulling her child closer, their whispers swelling into a hum of judgment that pressed against Serena's chest. Inside, a fire of indignation flared, but she clenched her fists behind her back, her training kicking in to suppress the urge to snap back. Years of rising through the ranks had taught her that silence could be a weapon, though it cost her dearly in that moment. "You've checked my ID, searched my bag, can I go now?" she asked, her tone firm yet measured, a plea for reason amid the chaos. But the officers exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them, and the older one shook his head, his lips curling into a smirk. "Not so fast, we need to run your name, make sure you're not on some watch list," he said, turning toward the patrol car with her ID still in hand, leaving her standing there, exposed, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting into her wrist from their earlier grip. The younger officer stayed close, his presence a looming shadow, his radio crackling with static as he muttered, "Bet she's one of those who thinks she's above us, let's see what the system says." Serena's breath hitched, a wave of humiliation washing over her as the crowd grew, their eyes a mix of pity and fear, and for a fleeting second, she wondered if her years of service, her medals, her sacrifices, meant nothing against the prejudice staring back at her. The pause stretched, the air thick with tension, until the older officer returned, his expression darkening as he held up her ID with a frown her clean record glaring back at him. Yet his disbelief only fueled his resolve. "Nothing? Doesn't mean you're clear, let's take this downtown for a proper look," he declared, his voice a thunderclap that jolted the scene into motion. The younger officer grabbing her arm with a force that made her wince, their laughter resuming as they prepared to escalate this unjust ordeal. In that instant, Serena's mind raced back to her mother's words. "Prove you're more." And though her body was restrained, her spirit hardened, a quiet resolve building within her, ready to turn the tide when the moment came. But the tragedy was far from over. As Serena's world narrowed to the cold steel of the handcuffs biting into her wrists, the officer's laughter ringing in her ears like a cruel anthem that refused to fade. The older officer gripped her arm with a force that made her wince, his fingers digging into her skin as he propelled her toward the patrol car, the younger one trailing behind with a smirk that seemed to mock every step she took. The crowd around them swelled, their whispers now a roaring tide shopkeepers frozen mid-motion, a child's voice piercing the air with a timid, "Why is she in trouble?" only to be hushed by a mother's frantic two-gauge gaze, a mirror, reflecting the humiliation searing through Serena's chest. Inside, her heart pounded with a mix of rage and disbelief, the weight of her years of service medals earned in silent battlefields, sacrifices made under foreign sky, scratching against the reality of being treated like a common criminal on the streets she'd once called home. "You don't need to do this, I've cooperated," she said, her voice steady but trembling with the effort to hold back the storm within. But the older officer cut her off with a scoff. "Save it for the station, resistance is resistance, even if it's quiet." The younger one chuckled, opening the car door with a flourish. "Time to see if your security story holds up, downtown, bet you'll sing a different tune there." As they shoved her into the back seat, the cramped space closed around her, the worn upholstery reeking of stale coffee and despair, the click of the door locking a sound that echoed like a judge's gavel. Serena closed her eyes for a moment, drawing on the memory of her mother's voice. "Prove you're more." A lifeline that steadied her breath amid the chaos, her dignity a fragile shield against the officer's taunts. Outside, the crowd's murmurs grew louder. A woman clutching her purse whispered, "She doesn't look dangerous," while a man shook his head, his face etched with pity. Yet no one stepped forward. Fear held them back, and that silence stung deeper than the cuffs. The officers slid into the front seats, their radio crackling with static as they exchanged coded remarks, their casual tone a stark contrast to the gravity of her ordeal, and Serena felt the weight of invisibility settle over her rank, her honor, reduced to nothing by two men who saw only her skin. But then, a spark ignited within her, resolve born of every time she'd been underestimated, every battle she'd won with quiet strength, and she knew this moment, as painful as it was, would not define her. Hey, if this heart-pounding journey of courage and justice has you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button to show your support, subscribe to our channel with the bell icon turned on, and join a community that thrives on stories that touch your soul and ignite your spirit. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next as Serena turns the tables in ways that'll leave you speechless. Just when the weight of humiliation threatened to crush her spirit, Serena Jackson summoned a strength that had carried her through battlefields and boardrooms, a strength that turned the confined space of the patrol car into a stage for her unyielding resolve. The stale air inside the vehicle pressed against her, the faint hum of the engine, a mocking reminder of her captivity, but Serena's mind was razor-sharp. Her years of training as a high-ranking general in U.S. national security kicking in with a clarity that cut through the fog of injustice. The officers in the front seats continued their banter, their voices a grating mix of arrogance and ignorance, the younger one tossing a taunt over his shoulder. "Let's see how long that calm lasts when we book you security expert or not." The older officer laughed, his eyes flicking to her in the rearview mirror. "Yeah, you're too quiet makes me think you're hiding more than bread in that bag." Their words were meant to break her, to strip away the last vestiges of her dignity, but instead, they ignited a fire within Hera, fire fueled by every moment she'd been underestimated, every time her skin had been judged before her soul. Serena straightened in the cramped back seat, the handcuffs chafing her wrists, and spoke with a voice that carried the weight of command. "I need to make a call. Omega security protocol demands it." The officers froze, their laughter dying in their throats, the younger one turning to face her with a sneer. "A call? What is this? Some kind of stunt?" But there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a crack in his bravado that Serena seized upon. She knew the power of her position, even if they didn't. "It's federal protocol, ignore it at your peril," she replied, her tone icy, her gaze unyielding as it met his through the metal grate separating them. The older officer hesitated, his hand hovering over the radio, then muttered, "Fine. Let's see what game you're playing. Give me the number." Serena rated the digits with precision, each number a step toward reclaiming her power, and as the older officer dialed, the atmosphere in the car shifted. The static crackle of the phone line felt like a lifeline, a tether to the world where her true authority resided. On the third ring, a voice answered, clipped and professional, "National Security Command Center. Identify yourself." Serena's response was immediate, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "This is General Serena Jackson, Operation Contingency, detained unjustly in Savannah, Georgia, under duress, no legal basis, 2 local agents present, no resistance on my part, requesting immediate verification and intervention." The silence that followed was electric, the officers' faces paling as the reality of her words sank in, the younger one stammering, "General? That can't be. There's no way." But the voice on the line cut through his disbelief. Voice and code phrase confirmed. "General Jackson. Identity verified. Access level 11 team dispatched. ETA 5 minutes. Remain in position." The officer's bravado crumbled, their hands trembling as they exchanged panicked glances, the older one gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, while the younger one's radio slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Serena sat back, her expression unreadable. But inside, A storm of emotions raged, relief that her call had been answered, fury at the injustice she'd endured, and a quiet pride in the strength that had carried her through. The car slowed to a stop on a quiet side street, the officers too stunned to speak, their earlier laughter replaced by a suffocating silence that spoke volumes. Their world was about to change, and they knew it. Minutes later, the low rumble of approaching vehicles broke the stillness. Four black SUVs pulling up with a precision that sent a shiver down the officers' spines. No sirens, no lights, just an unmistakable air of authority that rolled in like a tidal wave. Agents in dark suits emerged, their movements swift and coordinated, one of them approaching the patrol car with a badge in hand, his voice cold as steel. "Step out of the vehicle now." The officers complied, their faces ashen, their hands raised in a futile gesture of submission, while another agent opened Serena's door, his demeanor shifting to one of respect as he removed her handcuffs with careful precision. "General Jackson, you're secure. We'll take it from here." Serena stepped out, her hoodie still bearing the creases of her ordeal, but her posture was that of a leader, unbroken, unbowed. A woman who had just turned the tables on her captors with a single call. She glanced at the officers, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. And in that moment, she felt the weight of her journey from the streets of Savannah to the halls of power converge into a singular truth. Her silence had spoken louder than their taunts ever could. The crowd that had gathered earlier now watched from a distance, their whispers turning to gasps as the reality of her identity spread like wildfire. A general, a leader, a woman who had been wronged but was now reclaiming her rightful place. Serena adjusted her cap, her gaze steady, her heart a fortress of resolve, knowing that this was not the end, but a beginning, a moment that would ripple far beyond this quiet street, a testament to the power of resilience in the face of injustice. Not a moment too soon, the air around Serena Jackson shifted from tension to a quiet reckoning as the black-suited agents took command of the scene, their presence a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded moments before. The officers who had once held her in contempt now stood frozen, their hands raised in a gesture of surrender that mirrored the crumbling of their arrogance, their faces pale under the scrutiny of the federal agents who moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The lead agent, a man with a steely gaze and a voice that carried the weight of authority, approached the patrol car, his badge glinting in the Savannah sunlight as he ordered, "Step out, hands where I can see them," his words cutting through the silence like a blade. The older officer stumbled out, his earlier bravado replaced by a nervous stammer. "We got a call. A suspicious person," while the younger one followed, his radio dangling uselessly from his trembling fingers, his smirk gone, replaced by a look of sheer panic. Serena watched from the back seat, the handcuffs still biting into her wrists, her heart a tumult of relief and righteous anger as the agent turned to her, his tone softening with respect. "General Jackson, we're here, let's get you out." The click of the handcuffs releasing was a sound that reverberated through her, a release not just of metal, but of the indignity she'd endured. And as she stepped onto the pavement, her posture straightened, her hoodie creased but her spirit unbroken, a general reclaiming her rightful place. The crowd that had witnessed her humiliation now gasped, their whispers turning to murmurs of awe as the truth of her identity spread. A woman of power, a leader who had been wronged, now standing tall amid the agents who flanked her like a protective guard. Inside, Serena felt a surge of emotions, gratitude for the swift intervention, a lingering sting of the injustice, and a fierce determination to ensure this would not happen again, not to her, not to anyone. She turned to the lead agent, her voice steady but firm. "No vengeance, just make sure this changes something." And he nodded, his expression grave. "We'll handle it. General investigations are already underway." The officers were escorted to a separate vehicle, their heads bowed, their careers teetering on the edge of ruin, and Serena felt a moment of quiet satisfaction, not for their downfall, but for the possibility of a lesson learned. The agents briefed her on the next steps, their professionalism a balm to her frayed nerves, and she requested a moment alone, stepping aside to gather her thoughts under the shade of a nearby oak tree, its leaves rustling softly in the breezia, brief respite that allowed her to breathe, to process the whirlwind of the past hour. As she stood there, the memory of her mother's words, "Prove you're more," washed over her, a guiding light that had steered her through this ordeal, and she resolved to channel this experience into action, to use her voice to reshape a system that had failed her. Minutes later, she rejoined the agents, her cap adjusted with a deliberate motion, and outlined her vision-revised training for police on respect and due process, a call for accountability that went beyond punishment to prevention, her words measured but carrying the weight of a leader who had seen both sides of the badge. The lead agent listened intently, scribbling notes, and promised to escalate her suggestions to the highest levels, a commitment that filled her with a cautious hope. The crowd lingered, their eyes on her, and a young boy broke free from his mother's grip, running up to offer a shy, "Thank you," his small voice a spark of innocence that brought a rare smile to her lips, a moment of connection that eased the ache in her heart. But the officer's fate loomed large as suspension papers were being drawn, internal reviews initiated, and the weight of their actions began to settle. Their earlier laughter, now a distant memory, replaced by the sobering reality of consequences. Serena knew this was not just her victory, it was a call to action for a community, a nation, and she felt the responsibility settle on her shoulders like a mantle, heavy but purposeful. The agents prepared to escort her to a secure location, their SUV doors opening with a quiet efficiency, and as she moved toward them, she cast one last look at the officers, their figures shrinking in the distance, a silent testament to the power of resilience over retribution. This moment, she realized, was a turning point, not just for her, but for every person who had ever been judged unfairly, and she vowed to carry that forward, to turn her pain into progress. The Savannah Street, once a stage for her humiliation, now bore witness to her strength, and as the SUV pulled away, the crowd's applause, a soft, hesitant sound at first, then growing, followed her, a sound that warmed her soul and left her with a sense of purpose that no handcuff could ever chain. If this incredible tale of courage and transformation has you captivated, don't hold back, hit that like button to fuel more stories like this, subscribe to our channel with the bell turned on, and dive into a community that celebrates resilience and justice. Every click brings us closer to sharing Serena's journey to its breathtaking conclusion. Not a moment too soon, the SUV carrying Serena Jackson pulled away from the Savannah Street, the soft hum of its engine, a stark contrast to the chaos she'd left behind. Yet her mind remained tethered to the ordeal that had unfolded like a storm she couldn't outrun. Seated in the plush leather back seat, flanked by the respectful silence of the federal agents, Serena felt the weight of her hoodie still creased from the handcuffs, a tangible reminder of the injustice that had tested her to her core. Her hands, now free, traced the faint red marks on her wrists, each line a story of resilience etched into her skin, and her thoughts drifted to the journey that had brought her here from the dusty streets of her childhood, where she'd learned to dream against the odds, to the battlefields where her courage had been forged, to the command rooms where her voice had shaped national security. The agents exchanged quiet updates over their headsets, their professionalism a shield around her. But Serena's heart was a battlefield of its own relief, that justice had intervened, a lingering ache from the public humiliation, and a fierce determination to turn this pain into purpose. She leaned her head against the window, the glass cool against her forehead, and let her gaze settle on the passing blur of Savannah's oaks and storefronts, each familiar sight a thread in the tapestry of her life. Growing up, she'd walked these streets with her mother, a woman who scrubbed hospital floors by day and instilled unbreakable values by night. Prove you're more, with study, not shouts, words that had become her compass, guiding her through a world that too often saw her color before her character. That compass had led her to a military academy where she'd outshone peers with twice her privilege, to missions in distant lands where her leadership saved lives, and finally to a rank that few women, let alone Black women, had ever claimed. Yet, despite the medals pinned to her uniform, the respect of her peers, the trust of the White House, she'd never escaped the shadow of prejudice, a shadow that had darkened today's encounter, reducing her to a suspect in the eyes of those who didn't know her name. The memory of the officer's laughter, the crowd's fearful stares, stung afresh, and for a moment her chest tightened with a mix of anger and sorrow, anger at the system that allowed this, sorrow for the countless others who faced the same without a voice to call for help. But then, a wave of clarity washed over her, a resolve that steadied her breath. She hadn't fought back in the moment. not to avoid escalation, but to preserve her dignity, to prove her mother's lesson in the quietest, most powerful way. The SUV slowed as it approached a secure facility, the agents opening the door with a deference that warmed her heart, and Serena stepped out, her cap adjusted with a deliberate motion, her posture a testament to the strength she'd reclaimed. Inside, she requested a private room, a sanctuary where she could shed the armor of her rank and face the raw emotions beneath, and as the door closed behind her, she sank into a chair, the silence wrapping around her like a blanket. She removed her cap, running a hand over her braided hair, and let the tears she'd held back finally fall not of weakness, but of release, a catharsis that cleansed the sting of the day. The memory of the young boy's "thank you" echoed in her mind, a spark of hope that softened the edges of her pain, and she realized this ordeal was not just hers, it was a mirror for a nation struggling to see beyond skin. She wiped her eyes, her resolve hardening, and began to map out her next steps, not revenge, but reform. A vision of training programs that taught empathy, policies that demanded accountability, a legacy that lifted others as she had been lifted. The agents knocked softly, offering water and a moment of privacy, and Serena accepted with a nod, her gratitude for their respect a quiet balm to her soul. She thought of her mother again, imagining her proud smile, and whispered to herself, "This is for you for every time you told me to rise." The weight of that promise settled on her shoulders, a mantle she wore with pride, and as she prepared to brief the agents on her proposals, her voice grew steady, her words a call to action that would echo beyond these walls. She envisioned classrooms where officers learned to see humanity first, streets where no one feared a badge, a future where her story inspired change, and that vision filled her with a cautious hope, a belief that her silence today could speak volumes tomorrow. The agents returned, their notebooks ready, and Serena spoke with the authority of a leader who had faced the abyss and emerged stronger, her ideas flowing like a river, carving new paths, revised protocols, community dialogues, a commitment to justice that transcended her personal pain. As the meeting concluded, she felt a surge of purpose, a high that lifted her spirit, knowing this was only the beginning of a larger fight. If this powerful reflection on resilience and hope has touched your heart, don't miss a beat. Smash that like button to support these transformative tales. Subscribe to our channel with the bell on, and join a movement that celebrates stories like Serena's. Every click keeps the inspiration alive. And trust me, her journey's next chapter will leave you in awe. With the echoes of her resolve still ringing in her ears, Serena Jackson stepped out of the secure facility and into the Savannah sunlight, her vision for reform now, a seed planted in the minds of those who held the power to enact change. The agents had taken her words seriously, their notebooks filled with her proposals, training programs to instill empathy, policies to enforce accountability, and community dialogues to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the people they served. As she adjusted her cap, the weight of her experience transformed into a mantle of purpose she wore with pride. The street where her ordeal had unfolded hours ago now lay quiet, the crowd long dispersed, but the memory of their applause lingered in her heart, soft, hesitant sound that had grown into a wave, a reminder that her story had touched lives beyond her own. Inside, a storm of emotions swirled, pride in her resilience, sorrow for the necessity of her fight, and a fierce hope that her actions would ripple outward, reaching those who needed it most. The agents escorted her to a waiting vehicle, their deference a stark contrast to the officer's earlier disdain. And as the SUV rolled through Savannah's familiar streets, Serena's thoughts turned to the broader implications of her ordeal, the lessons etched into her soul by every moment of that harrowing day. She remembered the young boy who had thanked her, his small voice a beacon of innocence in a world too often clouded by prejudice. And she wondered how many children like him had witnessed their parents judged unfairly, their trust in justice shaken before it could even take root. That thought tightened her chest, a pang of responsibility that drove her to reflect on her own journey growing up in these same streets, where her mother's lessons had been both shield and sword, a mantra of "prove you're more" that had carried her from a childhood of scraped knees and whispered dreams to the pinnacle of national security. She'd faced countless battles to get their classmates who doubted her intellect, superiors who questioned her worth, A missions where her decisions meant life or death, and each victory had been a testament to her mother's wisdom, a quiet rebellion against a world that tried to diminish her. Yet, despite her rank, her medals, her legacy, she'd been reduced to a suspect on a Savannah sidewalk, her worth stripped away by two officers who saw only her skin, not her soul. The sting of that realization hit hard, a crescendo of sorrow that made her breath catch, but she let it wash over her, knowing that pain was the price of change, a fire that forged her resolve into something unbreakable. The SUV pulled into a local community center where Serena had requested to stop, a place she'd once visited as a child, its faded brick walls holding memories of summer programs and laughter, a sanctuary where dreams were nurtured against the odds. She stepped out, the agents giving her space, and walked inside. The scent of old books and polished wood greeting her like an old friend, a moment of respite that allowed her to breathe, to ground herself in the roots that had shaped her. An elderly woman at the front desk looked up, her eyes widening in recognition. "Serena, is that you?" And Serena smiled, the warmth of the greeting melting the edges of her pain. "Yes, Miss Clarate's been too long." Clara, who had once taught her to read in that very building, clasped her hands with a tenderness that brought tears to Serena's eyes. "I heard what happened. Word travels fast, and I'm so proud of you, child, for standing tall." The words were a balm, a reminder of the community that had lifted her up, and Serena sat with Clara, sharing her story not as a general, but as a daughter of Savannah, her voice soft but steady as she spoke of the officer's injustice, her mother's lessons, and her vision for a future where no one would face what she had. Clara listened, her eyes glistening, and when Serena finished, she squeezed her hand. "You're doing right by your mama and by all of us." That moment of connection, of shared history and hope, filled Serena with a renewed sense of purpose, a high that lifted her spirit as she realized her story was not just her own, it was a mirror for a nation, a call to see beyond appearances, to fight for justice with dignity, not rage. As she left the center, the sun dipping low on the horizon, casting golden light across the streets, Serena felt the weight of her mother's legacy settle into her bones. A legacy she was now passing on through every word, every action, every proposal she'd set in motion. Her ordeal had become a catalyst, a spark that ignited conversations in precincts and boardrooms, a story that inspired training reforms, policy reviews, and community outreach, programs changes that would take time but were already taking root. The officers who had wronged her faced their own reckoning, their suspension a stepping stone to broader accountability. But Serena's focus was on the future, on the countless lives her story could touch, the countless Serenas who might never face the same indignity because of her fight. She paused on the sidewalk, the same cracked pavement where her journey had begun that morning, and looked up at the sky, a single question echoing in her mind: how many others had been silenced, their stories untold, their potential unseen? That question lingered, a challenge to the world, a reminder that change began with seeing, truly seeing, the humanity in everyone. Serena adjusted her cap one last time, her heart full, her spirit unbowed, and walked forward. A general, a daughter, a beacon of hope. Her legacy a testament to the power of resilience, dignity, and the quiet strength that could reshape a nation, one step at a time. As the Savannah sun dipped below the horizon, casting its golden glow on the cracked pavement where her journey began, Serena Jackson stood as a beacon of unshakable resilience, a woman who turned a moment of profound injustice into a movement for lasting change. Through her eyes, we've seen the raw pain of being judged, not for her rank or her heart, but for the color of her skin, a wound that cut deeper than any handcuff ever could. Yet, in that same gaze, we've witnessed the power of dignity over despair, the strength to rise above hatred with a vision that heals rather than harms. I walk those streets in a hoodie not to hide, but to remind myself that true worth isn't in title, sits in the humanity we choose to see, Serena reflected, her voice a quiet force that echoed her mother's timeless wisdom. Prove you're more. With study, not. Her ordeal became a mirror for us all, reflecting the stark truth that justice isn't a gift bestowed, it's a garden, cultivated through courage, through voices that refuse to be silenced, through actions that demand we see beyond the surface. From the ashes of her humiliation rose a legacy of reform training programs that teach empathy, policies that uphold accountability, and a community awakened to the power of standing tall, even when the world tries to bring you down. Serena's story leaves us with a profound lesson. True change begins with the courage to see each other's humanity, to challenge prejudice with grace, and to build a world where no one's worth is diminished by the shade of their skin. Her journey challenges us to ask how many others are out there, their stories untold, waiting for a moment of justice to set them free. Let Serena's strength inspire you to be that change, to look deeper, to act with kindness, to stand for what's right. If her story has stirred your heart and ignited your spirit, show it by smashing that like button, dropping your thoughts in the comments, share how her journey moved you, and hit that subscribe button with the bell on to join a community dedicated to stories that uplift, inspire, and spark change. Together, let's uncover more tales of courage and hope, each one a step toward a brighter, more just tomorrow.